Hello, everybody. We're so excited to have you here and thank you for being here. You know that probably you're on vacation or getting ready to go on vacation. So gosh, the dedication just through the roof. So thank you so much for being here. And I think I saw my friend and colleague Karen Deary is here too from Patton. So she can give you a little wave. Or so fortunate to be back with Nancy and Julia and keep learning about this incredible book, the Reading Comprehension Blueprint Activity Book. I'll also be putting in the chat the link to the Padlet. We did, there was a little glitchy there with the tech, but today they did do the recording from last time that we were together. So that's on the Padlet now as well. And you'll have the activity guide on the Padlet. So if you don't have the link handy, I'll put it there in just a moment. And I will now turn it over to Nancy and Julia.
Hi, everybody. So glad to see all of you. I realized after we scheduled this that for some of you, this may be your vacation week. I was thinking more about Easter being the week, but I know here in North Carolina, they've had this week off. So if you're still joining us, wonderful. And those perhaps who couldn't, I'm so glad we're recording this so they'll be able to catch up with us. All right. So let's get going. I think Julia and I have lots planned to talk about tonight, and we're hoping that you were able to dig into and enjoy this chapter. All right, we always begin by thinking about ways in which we're going to learn together. So just a quick reminder of these icons that we used throughout the book itself, but also that we try to use once again as we have these discussions, right? We're going to do a quick revisit to sentence comprehension because we seem to run out of time. I don't know why that happens to us, but it does. There's always so much to talk about. So I don't mind this revisit because you all know this is one of my favorite things to talk about. All right. So I wanted to just have a moment to revisit this framework. As you know, for each of the components, the contributors to reading comprehension, we've tried to develop frameworks and instructional routines. And as I reflected on this and as I continue to read, as you all do and learn, I kept thinking about the fact that it's so important that we deliver explicit instruction, intentional on purpose instruction, but we should not be forgetting about the development of language through incidental on purpose. I read something this past week that spoke to the fact that, we hope our children come to school with strong oral language capability. If not, we continue to develop that. But the reality is we have to develop oral language for all our students through all the grades. We have to continue to build on that by building an opportunity for them to use their language orally, to use their language in writing, and so on. So when you take a look at this framework and some of the others that we've developed, you will almost always see some mention of, keeping on in terms of this incidental on purpose learning. All right, the way in which we've organized this one, of course, is we've looked at what the focus is, and the focus really aligns with our conversation about how we build meaning through sentence, and one by one, the sentence is adding up to the gist or the overall meaning of the text. So thinking through, how do we build comprehension of the building blocks of sentences? And of course, we have some of the activities that are listed here: questioning, parsing, structured organizers, sorts, visual representations, and so on. And then building an awareness and a competency then with different types of sentences, particularly problem sentences, those challenging sentences that are found in academic text, and then elaborating on and sometimes using similar strategy or building on strategy and activity that we've used for the building blocks, and then moving into cohesive devices. And we've really treated the cohesive devices somewhat lightly, I think, in this particular chapter, with the idea that we would return to them in the chapter on inference, on levels of understanding, all right? But again, thinking about what are the activities that might allow for us to deepen our students' understanding of how ideas are connected within and between each other within the text. And questioning, as you can see, always appears. It's really a strategy that has long been validated by many, many research studies, including the National Reading Panel. So it appears over and over again. And then just taking note of, because we don't want to forget about the fact that we have accommodated then for incidental, not only incidental, but incidental on purpose learning and using the same type of structure. All right. So just a couple of examples that were in the chapter on sentence comprehension. And of course, Julia developed these activities. And I just want to say, I'm so glad that she included opportunity for thinking about oral language development, not just in English language arts, not just in our English classes, but thinking about how we continue to capitalize on that in math, in science, in history, social studies, and of course in the language arts classrooms, right? And providing prompts that relate directly to what it is that the students are learning about. So getting them to talk about what it is that they're learning about, and then hopefully also giving them some opportunities to write about. So moving from talking to writing, I think Charlie Haynes talks about that a great deal, right? It reminds me as I think about this, Julia and I had the experience of working at AIM and with the teachers at AIM. And one of the things we always talked about was we teach literacy all day long. And I think this is a good example of that, how we can integrate both oral and written language into these other disciplinary areas. I mean, it's just one example of it, but I think a good one. All right, let's move on, right? And then it's, I think, particularly important that you make note of, and of course, this is a read slide, but you've already, I think, read it, that you make note of the fact that we've tried to accommodate for the diverse learner, all right? And just being critical of the fact that not only do we differentiate for all our students, but some of our students have specific challenges that we need to be thinking about in terms of differentiation and inclusive practices. And I think Julia's done a very nice job in the lesson plans of kind of highlighting that for us, thinking about adaptation, accommodation, and so on. I had a conversation the other night with a group of facilitators for another professional development group. And one of the participants just called attention to this again, saying to me, we have to always keep in mind that we're all coming to the topics that we're reading about and writing about with different perspectives. There's a commonality that we want our students to take away, those common ideas, the big ideas, the mental model, and so on. But we always have to be thinking about that there will be divergent and differing perspectives that are brought to the task. Okay. So I'm going to give you just a moment now to read this that's included. You've already read it once, but I want you to read it again. And then I just want to call attention to a few things within the text that you see here. So I'm reminded over and over again about the fact that when we work with students who have a second language or a dialect, that we have to be cognizant of what the differences are between that dialect or that language and ours. And that very often, not very often, I think consistently, we need to be building off of what the student brings with them to school, what it is that they know, what they are able to do. And here you have an example of African American English specifically impacting syntax. So we're talking about syntax and sentence comprehension here. So knowing what it is that we need to respect within, for instance, the African American dialect, and at the same time recognize that we need to build off of that in terms of the way we're going about teaching them to work with the academic language often found, more often than not, found in text. So there's one example here, the example of be in sentences, but one can think of the appositive pronouns, my mama, she, for instance, or subject verb agreement, they was looking, all right? And then the dropping off of that ending with the copula, looking instead of looking, and so on. So being aware of the fact, respecting that because that is their language, but at the same time, thinking about how we build from there. And then the second component here, or the third paragraph, I should say, but second component, is thinking about the syntactic structures themselves. That, we have a structure in mind, and we all know what it is, that who and do, or the which, one, what, kind, how many, and the who did what, to whom, when, where, how, and why. I mean, that's the syntax of English. But what's the syntax of the student for whom English is not their first language? And so there's just one example here of adjectives often follow the noun in Spanish. I'm just going to stop for a moment and see if anyone has any other differences that they might want to bring up that we should acknowledge here. And if you do, you can raise your hand, or you can go off mute, or put something in the chat box.
And I dropped a link, Nancy, to the article Teaching Reading to African American Children by Julie Washington and Mark Seidenberg, which is a really excellent article if you haven't had a chance to read it, and gives some really great information. And there's a great chart with the different breakdowns and things like that. So I really love that as a resource.
Yeah, thanks for doing that, Julia. Yeah.
Mhm.
All right. Anyone else with any comments so far on this?
I think Beth has her hand up.
Okay.
Um,
Go for
It's kind of related, but and I don't remember the specific detail, but I think it was on a TED Talk. They were talking about how the words of different cultures actually impacted how people saved for the future. So it's like the future tense of a word impacted the way that you thought about, like, some, I don't remember which language it was, but it was like there was no future tense. So that
Ah.
impacted how they saved money. I just thought it was fascinating. And
all right.
and I feel like it loosely relates to this, but just like how you think of past tense, present tense.
Yeah, and I do know that, and I'm going to have to go back and find this resource, and I think I mentioned once before. I recall that Elsa Cardenas Hagen did mention a resource for looking at what are the differences in varied languages across the different language systems. And I have to find it for you because I don't want to give you the.
Nancy, is that the ASHA resource?
I don't know if it's ASHA or not. I think it was another one. I think
Okay.
ASHA does certainly have one. And if you have that, Julia, yeah, if you
Let me
can,
give a quick search and I can.
you can find that.
Talking
But
about the one unique awareness, the inventories that they do, Ash, I have those and I'll put those in the chat. I
Yeah,
was finding that TED Talk, so
Yeah.
I'm putting the TED Talk in and then I'll put those in.
yeah,
I can
All
put them
right,
on a tablet. I'll put them on a
Yeah.
tablet. That probably will be a good spot for them.
yeah. There's another resource she mentioned that goes beyond just the phonemic awareness and looks at some of the other aspects of language as well. And I think that would be interesting for those of you for whom that's, something that you have to consider, a consideration for working with the students, within your classrooms, within your practices. Okay. All right. Let's see if we can move on. Okay, one of the things that we did include last time that I wanted to talk just a little bit about was assessment. And the reason that we included it in the this conversation is we're getting lots of questions about comprehension assessment. And I think all of us know that there are no great answers to the question about what should we use for assessment. But there are some answers. One of the things we have to recognize is that some of the standardized assessments based on research studies done by varied individuals, beginning with Jan Kanan, show that, what those assessments are tapping into very often, particularly the diagnostic ones, the formal diagnostics, they're tapping into different capabilities or skills. And so we don't always get a clear picture of what's going on with the student other than they have a problem, right? And so then we begin to think a little bit about, what kinds of activities are there beyond that, beyond maybe the standardized assessments or the end of grade tests, again, that kind of just are giving us kind of a global sense of the student having difficulty, but not pinpointing why. Are there some other things we could begin to think about? So I think I raised the question, think about various activities for processing and working with sentences in the chapter, and which of these activities could you envision utilizing as an informal assessment in your classroom? So I want you in a moment to respond to this, but I wanted to share a couple of things. I've added a couple of different slides here than you had last time. One of the things that Julia and I and others thought about a while back now is could we use some of the classroom activities and strategies as ways of assessing or informally assessing whether or not students were grasping what it was that we were teaching. So we're happy to share these charts. They're in the original text. Some of you have seen them in the original text, but they're not in the activity book. And so we have for varied contributors, including vocabulary, sentence comprehension, and so on, we've kind of thought through the focus, similar to what we've done with strategy and activity, building blocks. And then we've thought about some varied ways in which one might tap into students' understanding of, do they understand what parts of speech are, what they do? Can they find words that, answer, let's say, the question who, the question which one, what kind? Even using diagramming, but diagramming in a very meaningful way, underline the who and the do, underline the words that tell which one where. So you can see always kind of connecting back not only to form, but connecting back to function, all right? We also developed this for sentences. A sentence is different types of sentences, how many ideas, what's the logical relationship, some sentence sorts that answer a specific question, even drawing a picture, particularly for active versus passive, is sometimes really interesting to do. Sentence frames, paraphrasing, and summarizing. So I'm wondering if any of you have any thoughts about assessing in an informal way sentence comprehension, or perhaps speech language pathologists. I know you have, for those of you who are on and have that role, I know that there certainly are some language measures that can be used. So I'm going to invite you to use the chat and see if anyone wants to share at this point in time.
Lori put in the chat, she would consider using the parsing grid as an exit ticket or a quick comprehension check when the text becomes more complex to see who may need a reteach, which is an awesome idea.
That is a great idea. Yeah, okay. Any others?
Not yet.
Not yet. All right. Well, as you're thinking about this, the other thing I wanted to share with you, and I've probably shared this before, an informal diagnostic that can be used as part of the Acadian suite for comprehension itself is CFAL, capital C, capital F, capital O, capital L, standing for comprehension, fluency, oral language. And some of the tasks that are included there do tap into syntax, do ask questions about plurals, past tense, do call for working with sentence anagrams, repeating sentence, and also talk about story coherence, which I think connects as well to sentence comprehension. So that's part of the Acadian suite. And I think the other thing that we might do, Pam and Julia, I put together, Julia's seen this, but I cleaned it up a little bit. It's just a handout, a general handout on some of the things that we can use for comprehension. So we can send that to you, Pam, and you can pop that up too.
I will. I'll take care of that for you. And
Yeah.
there was a question that came up in the chat
Yeah,
a moment ago from Amber, and she asked would it be okay to assess orally, but she has some kids that get too nervous during test time and make mistakes, but apparently she can unmute as well.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. This is an accommodation that oftentimes we have to use for our students who have not yet learned to read proficiently, and yet, are able to decipher meaning based on sentence level when we work with them orally. So absolutely, yeah. Thanks for asking that, Amber. Yeah, okay. All right, so let me move on. Okay. So this is going to be your turn. All right. So you all need to get ready. We're going to have you in breakout rooms, and we've got about 43 people tonight. So I think we usually plan for about 9 rooms, 10 rooms. So I guess that would put maybe 4 people. Did we have 9 for the next breakout, Julia? I think there's 9 for the activities.
Yeah, normally we plan for
Yeah.
9.
So
Okay, so I'll just do 9, Nancy, is that good?
I think just do 9 and people end up where they end up. And please make certain that everyone has equal airtime, all right? Please make certain that someone is willing to report back because Julia and I really do want some feedback from you. You know that the blueprint is curriculum agnostic. We know that you're all using different program curricula materials. And we want to really support your use of the blueprint. And we're thinking this is a tool that might be helpful. But if you're thinking there could be something else or you want to add to it or just give us comment, we're more than willing to take that. So here's what we asked you to look at for sentence comprehension. Does the unit feature direct instruction in sentence comprehension? Or you could just say, does your teaching, does your program, does your curricula call for that? If so, how are students taught to parse and deconstruct difficult sentences found in the text? Is there any attention to that? And are there opportunities for teaching, modeling, and discussion of language structures? And language structures really has to do with syntax, sentence comprehension. And we asked you to think about some evidence or examples, some strengths, and maybe areas for development or improvement. What changes, additions might you make to your unit, to your instruction? Not all of you perhaps are using units. Maybe most of you are, I would think. But if not, just your instruction in terms of sentence comprehension. All right. So share your thoughts within your group. And then when you come back, we'll ask you to share your thoughts with us. All right.
Okay, and Nancy, how long would you like them? So they long?
What do you think, Julia?
Do we want to do I know we normally budget for 10 minutes. The groups are a little smaller tonight, so.
Yeah. Let's go for about 8 minutes, okay?
Okay,
Yeah.
sounds good.
Yeah.
All right, ready to go.
Yep.
All the rooms are opening.
Yeah, that'll be good. It'll be a little after 7 then when they come back. Cool. Yeah, I worked with, let's see if everyone is in rooms. Yeah, people are leaving.
I'm gonna pause here, the recording, and then we will remind me to start it back.
I too. So.
Here we go. Recording is back.
Yeah. Okay. All right, we'll just give it a minute because I think we still are missing a few people.
20 seconds, Nancy, and then we're back.
They come back, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I see Joyce and Sarah. Hi, and Lori. And we heard from Beth and Linda. And all right, we're getting there. We're almost there. Hi, Allison and Casey and Becky, Lisa, and Christine, Michelle. Hi, Michelle. Okay. All right, everybody. All right. So let's see what you all talking about in terms of your curricula, your program, strengths, weaknesses, thoughts, in terms of aligning with the blueprint and things that would have to happen maybe for that to occur. So room number 2, start with the even numbers. Room number 2, who wants to speak to what you talked about? Remember, you need a spokesperson. Who's speaking for room number 2?
It's H. Cole, Jennifer, Cherry, Kelly, Lori, Edgar, and Lori Z.
Okay. No room number 2?
Hi, sorry.
Okay.
How are you?
Hi.
I'm making dinner in the whole process.
That's all right. That's okay.
Nancy, we met at AIM Academy.
Nice to see
How are you?
I'm good.
So in room 2, we just talked about some of our varied experiences. I think for one teacher had tried some of the parsing sentences out. I think that we talked about definitely a necessity to do this work. I've already been doing some of the work in more so on the writing side, from the writing revolution and the writing rope.
Yeah,
But seeing how we can really support teachers and have them use these regardless of curriculum.
yeah,
Especially thinking about small group learning, because there are a lot of students that we come across that really are missing these simple, basic things. So, and I like the idea of just a quick way to turn it around, try it out as an exit ticket. I thought that was really helpful. And I never thought about using them as assessments. So, you know, we had some, I think some of the talk was that some of the upper grade, like they were meant, some of them for upper grades. So some people trying to find a way to like kind of bring it down to
Yeah.
make it appropriate at that grade level that they support. So.
yeah. Well, that's a good comment for us because we, during the break, we're talking about revisiting these charts that we put in the original text and rethinking them because it was just a start really because we knew there was nothing else out there. And I love the connection to the writing. As you know, at AIM, I spoke to this integration of comprehension and composition, and I'm still working on that, and I'm revising the chart. I was revising it today. And always thinking about the fact that you need explicit instruction in writing revolution, talking to writing, you know, whatever approach you might be using. And that really the integration that we're talking about here is more practice and processing of those skills that support both reading and writing, but the explicit instruction needs to be there. So making that connection is great. Okay.
Nancy, I was just gonna
yeah.
say too, like thinking about some of our littles and younger guys, like even starting with like if you wanted to do parsing and just have like the who and the what or the what and then like the do and starting with just 2 boxes and
Yeah.
then building from there, that I've seen a lot of folks doing in like first and second grades. I know when I worked at AIM, like our teachers would kind of start there and then they build on. So that's like a thought, just like differentiating the sentence frames. And I've seen our second grade team there used to have like picture cues and it was like really little guy appropriate. So I definitely think you can differentiate for sure.
Yeah. And I think in the activity book, you have something, Julia, as I recall, but I may be wrong, about just even using pictures to identify, or maybe we have that in the chart as well.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's like also a great way to help kids like generate, you know, ideas, especially when they're really little, and then they can continue to do it as they get bigger. But I love using, I mean, I love doing like anything with images. So
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. How about room number 4? You knew I was coming for you, so I'm on the even numbers. All right. Who's in room number 4? Who can speak? All right. And thanks for
Well,
contributing.
we started talking about dissecting sentences because we all seem to have an upper grade level background. So we started breaking apart the parts of a sentence, which allows us to talk about what each piece of that sentence is doing in the sentence. And then it allows us to expand what we know about those particular grammar pieces into understanding what the whole sentence means and how it's put together. And
Yeah.
it gives us a chance to go on. So that's how we can use the boxes that way.
Wonderful. Okay. So I love this idea of that kind of deconstruction work, right? You know, what's the contribution of each and then in combination with. And I like the idea of even though you know, we talk about there's no real scope and sequence in comprehension because every book is different, but there is a sequence, scope and sequence in terms of thinking about how different phrases and clauses evolve, for instance. And so if we bring that knowledge, then we can use that as well. And it's reminding me of an article that Cheryl Scott and Catherine Balthasar wrote a while back for Perspectives, in which they talked about complex sentences. And they actually had a chart that kind of listed out, you know, the phrases and particularly the clauses that are more complex and just building on what's simpler. So that's great. Okay. That's good.
Nancy, we also talked about how the newer knowledge building curricula, some of us in the group are using that, do include the sentence, where if you are using some of the I'll put in quotes, wonderful basils that don't address those.
Uh-huh.
So we had talked about 2 programs that 2 of us were using that do already include this, which is very helpful.
Wow. Okay. So tell us what the programs are. Don't leave us in suspense.
So one member of our group is using EL
Yes.
education,
Yeah.
and my district just finished a pilot of CKLA.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I would kind of expect that they might do something with it. But I mean, this is
My
very,
pilot team saw you and Dr. Kastner when you were at Thomas Jefferson, so we all
Oh.
came to see you. Yeah. I dragged them in. They had the day off. It was Columbus Day, and my district had a day off, and I got them all to come and see you and Dr. Kastner at
Oh.
TJ. So
Oh, thank you.
Oh, yeah, thanks. That was fun. That was fun to do that with Pam.
it was wonderful.
Yeah, we love working together when we have that opportunity. All right, well, thanks. I'm glad that had an impact. Okay, cool. All right, how about we try room number 6, and then I think we're probably going to move on. Okay.
Can I add one more thing? I was
Sure.
in group 4 too. We had quite a
Okay.
lovely conversation too.
Okay.
But I've even found by even if the learner doesn't even know the vocabulary, doesn't even know what the word meaning is, once they understand that sentence structure and that syntax of the sentence, they can identify who is doing what in the sentence. You can even, I've demonstrated it to staff even with nonsense words, the
Yeah.
non-believers,
Yeah.
that this is even an important
Yeah.
thing to teach. And I said, well, who's doing the sentence? And they'll say, well, it's the whatever. And I'm like, well, what is that? They're like, I don't know, but I know because the sentence is built that way. And
Yeah.
I'm like, it's not even a word. It's not
Yeah.
even a word, but you know that because you know syntax and you know
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
subject. And so it's,
Yeah, I love that, Jennifer, because the reality here is the word takes on its meaning dependent upon where it is in the sentence. It's the syntax that's the vehicle for conveying meaning. All right. So that's exactly it. Wow, that's really cool. All right. Okay. What did I say before? We did 2, we did 4, we're going to do 6. Where's 6? Who is in room number 6? No one in 6?
They might not have known their room, so this is not to put anyone on the spot, just jog memories.
Yeah.
6 was Christine Pulvers. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Casey Calburn, Lisa Lumries, and Michaela Dickey.
So
I'll
it's-
talk for room 6. We had just talked about how like the programs that some of us were using, or that I guess we were seeing, it didn't necessarily seem like they had direct instruction on syntax and sentence structure, and things like that. But we talked about how we also felt that it was really important because it really does help them to understand and comprehend. And we kind of went around and shared some of the things that people were doing. And I got some really great ideas of things to use in my classroom. I know one of the members of our group had mentioned about, I think she called it shape coding, where like you would put a certain shape around the subject or the noun, and then another shape goes around the verb and things like that. And somebody else said about how they have their students draw pictures and things like that of the sentence. And then, so
Yeah.
what is the girl, or what is Jane? Jane is the noun. And what is the apple? That's, another noun, but it's the object in the sentence. And, what is the action that she's doing to the object, or things like that.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, I think that for me, because I know the program that my district has right now doesn't necessarily have a component that teaches that. Like those are 2 really good ideas that I kind of took away, and it kind of reminded me of the sentence parsing box that we use. So just another strategy or another thing to kind of add to our teacher tool belt.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay. All right. So thanks for doing that sharing. I think that's really valuable information for Julia and I as we continue. And if you have thoughts about anything that we should tweak in this tool, we are open to hearing your thoughts, because you are doing the work. I mean, we're just 2 minds working together. It's the more the merrier on this from an informed group. Okay. And I see Pam is sharing all sorts of wonderful resources here. Very cool. All right, let me go back to sharing my screen and see where we are. And here we are. Okay. Just need to get us into slideshow. All right, so we did number 1, and of course, sending you a structured guide each week. So we asked you to read chapter 5 on text structure, complete the varied activities, and connect to current thinking and practices. And to choose at least one of the try this activities that you can perhaps discuss as we move into breakout rooms. And then hopefully to be thinking about the pulling it all together on page 127. And if not this evening, maybe next time, come prepared to share an activity aligned with general guidelines. Okay. All right, so implementing the blueprint text structures, chapter 5. So always, we're asking you to do the check-in, because what we want, just as you want for your students, is to make connections to what it is that you already know. So surface and script what comes to mind when you think about the what, the why, and the how of text structures. Okay. And each of the chapters, as you know, begins with quote. I really like quotes, and I really like the work of Jane Oakhill, Kate Kane, and in this case, Karsten Elbrow. And, you know, they're just reminding us of how important it is to be familiar with the structures of text, that readers who have several advantages. They know what they're looking for, what to search for, the particular types of information, and how the different parts of the text are linked together. And sometimes when I take a look at this quote, I begin to think about, you know, what other words come to mind as I'm thinking about this? Are there some things that I can make connections with? And it brings forward words like remember, anticipate, search for, organize, process efficiently. All of these words are words that connect up. It's really kind of my semantic network, right, for text structure. Thinking about why text structure is so important to the reader, right? Right. So in each of the chapters, as you know, we begin by surfacing some word meaning so that we're all on the same page, all right? And so thinking a little bit about let me just go back for a minute. Yeah, this is correct. Here we go. Thinking a little bit about, do we have a common understanding of word? And so this is a lexicon check, all right? And this has to do with definitions and descriptions. So in the chat box, would you just quickly, just a few words in terms of what comes to mind when you think about literacy knowledge? What's in your lexicon for that particular term? All right, so let's go to the chat box and do that.
So understanding things like story grammar, Casey just shared.
Mm-hmm.
Understanding the purpose, genre.
Yeah.
Breadth of literacy. Types of genre and how they're organized. Understanding print when you're reading. Language has meaning, text structure, how pieces within the text work together, understanding the language.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Good. So we could almost create a network, couldn't we, of those all of these different connecting words and phrases related to the term literacy knowledge, right? And of course, we know that this is one of the strands, really, of the reading rope. It's something that pops up in the other theoretical models that are related to developing language comprehension and reading comprehension. The definition that we used here has to do with understanding of how printed language conveys meaning, including our ability to acquire and apply knowledge of print concepts, as well as purpose, structures, and features of different text types. And so we don't deal with here in this particular activity book print concepts, the original text does. And I just wanted to make mention of that because when we do a book study on the original text, some of you have participated in that. You know, we delve deeply into print concept, including, you know, the way in which print is organized, left to right, and so on, how the page is organized, how the print communicates ideas, that while the pictures are supportive, they can communicate ideas, but here we're really focused on the print doing that. And also even going into recognizing that letters represent sounds and that together they represent words and so on. Of course, our focus in this particular chapter in the activity book is much more on the different type of genre, the different structures that we use to communicate ideas. So included in the what, the definitions and descriptions, we've talked a bit about being aware of, and we'll delve a little more deeply into this in a minute, but being aware of the purpose, the structure, the features, right? This is kind of basic foundational knowledge in terms of narrative text as well as informational or expository text, right? We also talk about the science, all right? And we always want to be able to answer the question why. So we have the what, but we want the why. And here we turn to the work of Joanna Williams, who has done a great deal of work in terms of text structures, particularly with younger children. And again, talking about the fact that this prior knowledge of structure and text signals supports their understanding of the relationships expressed in the text, right? And in this way, the reader is guided to identify, and you'll recognize this word, we've talked about this before, the macro structure of the text, and to organize it into a coherent mental representation. So, you know, when we talk about the microstructure of a text, we're really talking about the vocabulary and the syntax, right? When we begin to get into the macro structure, we're talking about how the ideas are organized to communicate something specific, a specific purpose, right? We also have seen that word macro structure before when we talked about what is it that the reader has to do when they come to text. We talked about the microprocesses, elaborative processes. You may recall this, it was a graphic. And at the very end, we talked about the macro processing that the student has to go through in order to arrive at this overall organization of text. So text structures are very, very important. They're much more than a graphic organizer. They really are all about how that text is organized and how it conveys really purpose, big ideas, critical understandings, and so on. We also can think a little bit about the fact that the science, in addition to the work of Joanna Williams, the science itself, the Institute for Educational Sciences practice guides, you know, kind of urge us as educators to teach students to identify and use organizational structures to comprehend, learn, and recall content, all right? They emphasize this is particularly important in the early grades. And we can see the work of Tim Shanahan, Rutzel, and again, Joanna Williams reflected here. There's other research work that also talks about narrative discourse, right? Language, oral language being related to reading development. And the work of Kane and Oakhill, again, tell us that poor comprehenders have difficulty with processing text. They have three characteristics that they typically manifest. One is this inability to work with story structure. And by story structure, they mean overall organizational structure of text. So I think it's really important for us to keep that why in mind. All right. All right, take a moment. This is Tips for Success. And every time you see the little figure jumping up and down here, it's one of our tips for success, and it's meant for you to read it. So take a moment and reread it now. So I think one of the things we wanted to consistently remind the readers of the activity book, including all of you, is that while we're talking about each of these competencies or contributors separately, we know that they're intertwined. The reading rope reminds us of that, and that many of the approaches, questioning, for instance, relates back to when you can see examples of it not only being about text structure, but it's tapping into the students' microstructures. It's tapping into their word meaning. It's tapping into their syntactic structure, sense, and so on. And it's important, I think, for all of us to keep that in mind. All right. So we're going to now be focused on the how. I'll briefly introduce it, and then it's Julia's turn. All right. And of course, when we talk about the blueprint, we're talking specifically about text structure as being a type of knowledge. All right. We've pulled that out here from the knowledge section because it is a specialized type of knowledge. All right. And we want for ourselves, all right, as we're thinking about and preparing for instruction and delivering instruction, to be thinking, how's the text organized? How and when will we directly teach the purpose, features, and signal words? How we teach students to use the structure to understand purpose, to organize and express their understanding, right? And of course, foundational, and I'll go very quickly through this because you've seen it, instruction should initially focus on the basics of text structure. We know what those are: purpose, structure, features, and forms, and signal words, right? And I think that very often we are very, very cognizant of the fact that we need to be talking about purpose, for instance, with narrative text, entertain, provide an account of events, and structure, story structure. I wonder if we really focus on features and the words that have to do with the features. Beginning, middle, end, in the beginning, then in the end, and so on. And Julia does a brilliant job, I think, with one of the activities of showing you these signal words for narrative text. But so important to be thinking about this is sort of foundational knowledge. That's knowledge that the student should have automatically, that they can access as they come to varied texts, right? Same thing for informational text, and we know purpose, inform, explain, report. And of course, we all know these structures because we teach them. I shouldn't say we all, but many of us teach them for writing. And so this is a wonderful way to kind of integrate the comprehension and composition. But then talking about the features of a text: paragraph, table of contents, headings, boldface, charts. And then, of course, the signal words that are specific to each of the types. All right. Here are our general guidelines, and I'll finish with this and hand it off to Julia. So some general guidelines, and in a sense, this is the framework for text structure, all right? And this has been culled from a review of literature by both of us. And so what the literature tells us is we should use exemplar texts that have the features, the structures, etc., that we're directly, explicitly teaching our students, and then we move to processing and practicing within the text itself. The use of visual representations. So the use of graphic organizers, visual cues, certainly teaching strategies, very often through questioning that have to do with the structure of the text, paying attention to the signal devices. We know how important those signal words are in terms of connecting up ideas within and between sentences. We know that a type of cohesive device is the conjunction, and they are the signal words for the most part. And then planning for effective teaching and student questioning, which I've just already mentioned. All right, Julia, it's your turn. Okay, everybody. Before I go any further, any comments, any questions that anyone wants to add in the chat box? Because I've been talking for a bit.
And while we're waiting just to see, I am working on, I know we talked about last time, sharing some of the templates and resources, especially the technological, like different applications. And I'm working on that. My family and I just got back from Disney, so I'm working on it, and I should have it ready by the next session. And Jennifer just put in the chat, the words used in different paragraphs help to indicate the text structure and help organize and present information in a way that satisfies the purpose of the text. If students are able to recognize this vocabulary that authors use to organize the text, it aids them in their comprehension.
Love that. That's great.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I love that you help us make this even more explicit. So, yeah, great. All right.
Awesome. So I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about the model lesson plans. So each of the sections, you guys know, starts off with these model lesson plans, and they look at specific components of intentional and independent text structure strategies in this chapter. So we're going to take a look at those, and we'll talk about them first, and then we're going to jump into some activities. Go ahead, Nancy.
Oh, I'm forgetting. I'm in
No,
charge.
it's
I forgot I
okay.
was in charge.
So the lesson plan review, so the pages 97 through 100, we start off with our first lesson plan, and this is really looking at two kind of components of narrative text, and that's character and conflict. Now, this lesson was geared towards, 8th grade students, middle school students, but thinking about conflict in terms of, okay, internal and external conflict, if we're thinking about our younger learners. And obviously, character is something, we spend a lot of time exploring at all ages. And so this lesson really started to think about the 4 primary types of conflict in literature and working around them. Going back to our short stories that are aligned to our, enduring understanding. So we have in this particular lesson plan, it focuses on The Jacket by Gary Soto. Which is about a young man who receives a jacket, if you haven't read it, that is not what he had envisioned, and kind of really deals with some conflicts around his family and money and status. And then in terms of Fish Cheeks by Amy Tan, which is one of my personal favorite short stories. And this is, a story about the author herself and really struggling with her, American identity versus her Chinese identity and what that meant. So those were 2 exemplar texts. As Nancy mentioned, those were, when we think about best practices, we really want to focus on exemplar texts. And both of these short stories, they emphasize both character and conflict. So they were really great for this particular lesson. And I think what also is kind of nice about this lesson and why I wanted to highlight this is this idea is it's chunked into 2 parts. So really you spend some time first talking about the stories individually. So you look at what's going on in The Jacket, and then you look at what's going on in Fish Cheeks, and each of them is a separate conversation and a lesson. And then the second part, we get into compare and contrast. So, we're working with this narrative text, but then we're thinking about the similarities and differences in these characters' experiences. So a really kind of, nice way to think about conflict and how conflict differs. Both of these stories are coming of age stories. They're grappling with their identity. And so the conflicts are a little bit different in both, but, same sort of themes and ideas. So tips for success. So I'm going to give folks a moment to take a look at this and read it. And then just going to highlight a couple of things. So I was really, really fortunate when I worked at AIM to have some time with Dr. Julie Washington. And so one of the things that we talked a lot about was this idea that many narrative stories that we read in schools are typically based on European storytelling traditions. And many children come to school with this knowledge, but not all. So I think it's really, really important to be aware of the diverse linguistic and cultural backgrounds our students come to school with. And just, in terms of thinking about narrative story structure, we really need to explicitly teach those elements. And then thinking about the opportunities for the students to share and write stories from their own culture. So just something that I think is really important for us to be mindful of, because that was something when I thought of it, I was like, that was a really good piece of information. So, as Dr. Archer said, don't commit a suicide and, assume that our kids know these things. All right, so our second lesson plan that kind of starts off this chapter is really focusing on informational text. And tonight we'll talk a little bit about, we'll go through narrative and then we'll go through activities for informational. But this was a text structure lesson to really think about descriptive text in first grade. So this unit, which is from the All About Me unit, if you looked at the book list, it focuses on a lot of narrative stories, but that doesn't mean we can't incorporate informational texts, because we know that even our youngest guys vocabularies, they need exposure to and practice with informational text. It is really, really challenging, and this can start early. So this lesson is, again, chunked into 2 parts. The first looks at a close reading of what is a community. And then the second involves the construction of a written response. So pairing that idea of text structure with writing, and I'll highlight some more examples of that later. That's something that I really love to do. I think it can be really powerful. I know that I love the Writing Revolution, use a lot of those strategies with the high school boys that I work with, but I've used them with our, younger students as well when I taught in an elementary setting. Okay. And then this is, I think, just the note, again, and I mentioned this on the previous slide, but expository text is definitely more challenging. Kids come to school more often with knowledge of narrative story structure. They see that in terms of movies that they watch or shows, books that maybe they've been read to at home. And so these texts can be very, very challenging expository informational text, especially for our multilingual learners. And that's partially because of the vocabulary knowledge. I think somebody mentioned that earlier, just like having the vocabulary knowledge and how much that contributes to our comprehension. So again, being really aware of this, and as well as the sentence complexity. These texts get more and more complex. So can be very challenging. And so just building in that awareness.
Yeah. And we've just included in this particular chapter these tips that relate to the diverse learner, sort of embedded within the chapter instead of at the end. Yeah. All right. Okay. I'm just going to keep going, Julia. So
Okay.
Here we go. So I think you're moving to activities. Right?
Yes. So
Okay.
we talked about our model lesson plan. So now we're going to jump into some activities. And Nancy, you can go ahead with this
Yep.
one.
Yep.
Okay. So again, Nancy took us through what, in terms of the research and what it says about, best practices. And I think I really like this slide, and I don't know if it might have been in our first night
Yeah.
that we
Yep.
presented. Yeah.
Yep.
And so I think it's really important here, though, when thinking about exemplar texts, it's being really purposeful with what you want to teach. So with this particular unit, it really does focus on personal narrative. And so there was a variety of different genres that were selected. So again, we've got Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi, which is a graphic novel, really, really great text. And it, connects to this idea of telling these personal stories and also this piece of finding one's identity. Thinking about short stories, I mentioned Fish Cheeks, which is one of my favorites, and The Jacket by Gary Soto. The House on Mango Street, so many, this is like, I think another one of my favorites, but beautiful story told in a series of vignettes, which is really, really powerful. Brown Girl Dreaming is another one, and this is told entirely in free verse poetry, I believe. And so very, very like different structure to explore. And then more of a traditional sort of autobiography when thinking about I Am Malala. So I think it was really important to think about this exemplar text so that giving kids exposure to a variety of different genres. And this is something, as we're thinking about like our little guys, thinking about a kind of a unit on fairy tales that Kate O'Reilly, who was a teacher at AIM, used to teach. But this idea of she brought in fairy tales, she brought in some folk tales, the different structures. They looked at some modern versions of those. So really thinking purposefully about giving students as much exposure as possible to those different features, purposes, those conventions. And I think, I'm a big believer in, you can get a lot of bang for your buck and thinking about, okay, this is my cohesive text set, and this is how I'm going to build that.
Yeah, I love that you've included this, Julia, because I think thinking about, we talk about structure for narrative and we talk about story grammar, but it's not just, all that simple. We have to be thinking about the varied types of text that we can label as narrative and how there's nuance and difference in the structure. We may have a basic structure, but then, as I said, that was foundational, but then you move from that. Yeah, so it's great to be thinking about that. Okay.
All right, so we're going to walk through some activities for narrative, and then we'll hop over and we'll talk about informational expository text. And we're going to go through and talk about, so we'll talk about for narrative story elements and structure. We'll talk about the use of visual representations, signal words, and then how we can build in teacher and student questioning. And for each of these, I'm going to highlight a specific kind of connection to writing, which is stuff that I've been using with some of the boys that I work with at school. All right, so we've got first up story elements and structure. And I think it's really important to consider the progression of story elements here. Thinking about them as the basic sort of story elements, and when we think about character, setting, problem or purpose, sequence of events, outcome, theme, sort of the entry point, right? But then we can also think about the more advanced elements that build over time. So as our learners get older, they're learning more about the nuance of the stories. So they're thinking about point of view and perspective in regard to character. They're talking about foreshadowing and mood and tone. You're expanding upon conflict. We're thinking internal and external, and the different types of conflicts that exist. Our sequent events, we'll talk a little bit of the Freytag period later on, pyramid later on, but, thinking about the different parts of plot. Again, and thinking about some of the more advanced concepts like symbolism or motif. As early as even getting into 6th grade, I mean, Esperanza Rising is a really beautiful book, but that deals a lot with motifs throughout. And I think, getting sort of thinking about that. This is an example of, for those of you who work with older students, I get a lot of questions about annotations and note-taking because kids oftentimes don't know how to do it. They don't know how to annotate text. They don't know how to take purposeful notes. And this was an example with our freshman class who just finished up Raisin in the Sun, and they were really working on internal and external conflict and how that impacted the characters' personal dreams. So the book's all about, dreams and how we achieve our dreams and if, the American dream is possible. So for this was a coding sheet that the kids can put right inside their text, or they can put it, with their materials. But they had to code IC for internal conflict and EC for external conflict. And then there was some prompts underneath to kind of help them think about what to jot down. And what I've noticed is that, when we say, okay, you're going to go in, and some of our teachers will say to the boys, annotate the text, they kind of will be like deer in headlights and they don't know what to do. So this was a nice way to scaffold this for them. And again, I think, it just gives them a simple coding system, and it's purposeful because you're really thinking about, all right, we're thinking about conflict and how that presents itself in the story.
Yeah, those questions are great scaffolds. Yeah. All right.
All right, so this is a quick try this. We don't have to, we won't spend a lot of time. I was just in Disney. These are my littles. That is my daughter all the way on the right with the mouse ears. My niece is the tallest, and then my little one, Mila, in the Rainbow Dash hoodie. So what we're going to do is we're going to try thinking about the story elements using a familiar story. So this can be done, when we think about our youngest learners, starting with something familiar. Kids are oftentimes, they have exposure to, fairy tales. We don't want to assume, but they have, familiar fairy tales like the Three Little Pigs or Little Red Riding Hood. So we're going to think about Cinderella because I just met her and she's fresh in my brain. So if we were to ask, right, so a chart like this, right, who is this story about? Who's it about? You guys can just put it in the chat. I'm going to keep my eyes on it.
I can, yeah.
Oh, thank you, Nancy.
Let me see. Doesn't want to open for me, so you'll have
Yes,
to.
Cinderella mouse. I love it. Yep. Oh, Prince, fairy godmother. We're getting the whole kit and caboodle. I love it. Excellent. All right. Where and when does the story take place? Oh, Disney World. Yes, it did for me.
Disney World.
Definitely. It was an experience.
In the castle last
In a
week.
castle last week, long time ago in Fantasy World. I love it. Castle, beautiful. Yes. All
Yeah.
right. Okay. So in the story, Cinderella, what was Cinderella's main problem? Or
Mm.
what does she want to achieve? Oh, she couldn't go to the ball. Yep. She wanted to go to that ball, and her evil stepmother would not let her go. I love it. Beautiful. Um, how does she try to solve her problem? What does she do to achieve that goal? And I know she gets a little help. Oh, the mice made her a dress. She gets her chores done. Her fairy godmother. She creates her own outfit. I love it. Perfect. And then what happens at the end of the story? She gets the prince. She meets the handsome prince. She goes to the ball, happily ever after, lived happily ever after. Love it. This is great. She falls in love. And then finally, what's the theme? What did the character or what lessons, right? Could be lesson or lessons. What did she learn? Never give up on your dreams. Love it. Believe in your dreams. These are all great. Yes. So that's exactly how I would use this chart. And you could start something simple like a familiar fairy tale and then build from there.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So visual representations. This is one of my favorites. So the image here is a Freytag pyramid. And so this is, typically like upper, I would say middle school and beyond. But so using a visual for story structure is great. And so obviously this is for some older friends, but you could use a simple beginning, middle, and end kind of chart, and like we have in the activity book for folks with our littler guys. And so this really helps people visualize the story's organization. So you can see this is for fish cheeks. So we have the exposition, the rising action, the climax, the falling action, and then the resolution. So once that was taught with the story that we were using, then that can be used, that same Freytag pyramid can be used to brainstorm a story. And this was one of my one of my sophomores' stories about how jujitsu really changed their outlook on athletics. They were, they went from being like, I'm not that interested and then help them develop self-discipline. So I thought that was a nice example. And I see Nina has her hand up. Hi, Nina.
Hi, I just have a real quick question about the plot mountain. So we do plot mountain represented like this, but we actually changed it because we had students, and I teach 7th and 8th grade. So we had students like thinking the climax was happening in the middle of the book. So intentionally, as we were reading the novel, I would stop and show them, look where we are in the novel. Have we reached the climax yet? No. So we kind of changed it so the exposition is on the left side, and then the rising action is really long, and then we've got a short falling action and resolution section.
That's awesome. No, that's like such a great tip. I love that. And I think that what's nice about that too is like I could totally, that makes so much sense in middle school thinking. No, that's fantastic. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, very good idea. Yeah. Okay.
So then this is just highlighting signal words. So going back to that personal narrative that one of my students wrote about, jujitsu, we kind of then went back and they worked on a draft of their own personal narrative. And so they went through the brainstorming and they got everything, down. And then this was their first draft. And one of the processes that we went through was looking at those signal words, specifically for looking the single words at the end of the story, because this is a section here that's close to the end. So he used phrases like looking back, eventually, after a while. And we kind of talked about this is a way that we can, when authors are thinking about these stories, it helps with the flow, it helps with the cohesion. So being really intentional and pairing those signal words to the writing, which was a really great activity for the boys to go through and practice.
This is such a good example, Julia, of that integration that I was talking about earlier between comprehension and composition. So directly, explicitly teaching our students about these signal words for both, and then finding ways of processing and practicing, the application of. Yeah, that's a wonderful example. Okay.
And then, yeah, and Jen just put a comment in here too, thinking about multilingual learners and how these signal words are really, really important. Yeah, 100%. And I think what was nice with this unit for the boys, they read Persepolis and then they do their own personal narrative, which is a nice connection. And so, but being able to be like really intentional and spend time with those words so that they're really, understanding. Sometimes I feel like there's that pressure to move so quickly. And yeah, they're really, really important. I would
Yeah.
agree. And I think that being able to spend that time and intentionality is super critical.
Yeah, explicitly teach.
Yeah.
And again, the signal words oftentimes have kind of a developmental progression as well. So important to understand that and know when you have to scaffold for your students. Yeah. Okay.
So questions, I know that we've talked a lot about this, how powerful a tool questioning can be. And so again, thinking about narrative as basic level, kind of entry level questions, and then more advanced. And I think that teacher directed questioning can be incredibly powerful. And I think it's important for us as teachers to think about what's our goal? So what are our goals for student understanding? How can we really target those questions to the ideas that you want your students to walk away with? So when I was thinking about earlier and included that example of the conflict and the annotations, that's what we really were focusing on. You can't, in my experience, you can't get at everything in a novel. So really thinking about your enduring understandings, how you tie what you're exploring in the novel to that, and being really purposeful. I think you get the most bang for your buck, and your kids, they learn the most about those, elements. So just being really, mindful about the types of questions you're using, thinking about, did you use all closed response or open response? Like, so being varied in that approach as well. So really, really including both. And then, again, thinking about what students might say. That's always, never know, the anticipation of what students might come up with. So it's important to consider that as well. All right, Nancy, would it be possible to share my screen? Is that okay real quick? And then you can pick up. Is that okay?
Yeah, Julia would just have to, Pam would have to make you co-host.
I think I can share, but only one of us at a time. So is it okay?
I already have a co-host, so she's good.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So I am going to, share my screen. Let's see, hopefully this works. Okay. Can everybody see my screen right now? Is it good? Okay, so I wanted to share with folks tonight CuriPod. This is one of my new tech connections, and my tech director, Andrea Drinkwine, she turned us on to it. And what's really cool, it's an interactive presentation tool for making lessons. And I'll show you my sample in a second. But what's really neat about it is that you can kind of have a lesson, or if you have a slide deck, a lot of us use Google Slides, you can put it into CuriPod and work with its AI generator to kind of create new engaging activities within lessons. And that includes things like polls. You can do word clouds, you can do drawings. So it's really, really cool and interactive. There are limitations as with any AI program. So it could provide incorrect information. So you want to go through, obviously you as the expert and teacher are scanning things for that. But it's definitely, I think, a really neat thing to play around with and try out. It's free for teachers for the basic features. If you want to export the presentation, and that's not available in the free version, but you can save it within CuriPod itself. So let me just show you. And if I present, so I'm going to show, let's do. So you can kind of go through and I can show you, but what this activity, it has different things. So for example, it gives polls. And so this would come up, my students would, they would enter a pin and then they would be able to take a poll. All right, what is the central theme of Fish Cheeks by Amy Tan? And so they would get an opportunity to put in what they thought was the right answer. It has some slides in terms of kind of thinking about, and I'm, looking at story structure specifically, but what I really love about it are some really neat activities. So based on the exposition provided, what are some internal and external conflicts Amy is facing? Discuss how these conflicts might affect. And so they can draw right on there. They could create like a little T-chart and write, internal conflicts and list them out, external conflicts. And so, and I love, this little prompt, sit together in pairs, use text or drawing or visuals to, show your thinking. It can also give things like open-ended questions. I thought this was kind of fun, which may need tweaking depending on time. But like, how does Amy's perspective describe her feelings during the rising actions, focus on her, the differences and her embarrassment, right? So you could kind of think about how you could incorporate prompts like this. Again, and some more kind of activities, and they give you a variety of different things that you can do. So this is just one of, one of the slide decks that I was playing around with, but it's nice. It's very interactive, and I think it's definitely worth checking out, for sure. All right, and I will stop my share now. All right.
All right, and let's see if I can go back to my slides. I think so. And that worked. All right, and we just have to get to the right slide. So,
Julia, is it similar to Pear Deck but with AI?
Yes, it is
Okay.
similar to Pear Deck. That is a great question. Yeah, so one of the questions, so when this comes up on your screen, the student's screen, what they'll do is they put in a pin, similar to like how Pear Deck work. I think Pear Deck works with a pin, but they put in a pin and it takes them to their own, it starts them up on their own screen, and then they're able to interact with it individually. So they don't go outside. You don't have to do it. They do it on the slide themselves. So like they have their own interactive, and then it populates. Once all the kids are done the poll, it would show the whole class's, feedback.
So it's similar to Pear Deck or Nearpod.
Yep.
But
Yeah.
without the AI in that respect.
Yeah. And this, what's nice about this is you can take any existing slide decks that you have. So if you have lessons that are built in the slide decks, you can drop it in and then you can work with it and manipulate. It can give you new ideas. So really cool.
Yeah.
All right. So we're going to transition. Oh, Nancy,
Yep.
would you go back one for me?
Yep.
And I think I would probably, maybe in the interest of time, I won't do the activity, but I'll show it.
Yeah. Getting there.
Yeah, that one.
There we go. You close out the chat and something happened with the slides. All right, here you go.
So we're going to talk about informational, and we'll just kind of go through teaching basic paragraph structure, visual representation, signal words, and then questioning again. So there will be some similarities here.
Okay.
So teaching basic paragraph structure, I think, is foundational knowledge for informational text structure. Typically, we can think about it as a topic that expresses the main idea. We have our details, sentences, and then a closing. When we think about, this typically in conjunction with writing, but knowledge of basic paragraph structure is really important for comprehension as well. So this was an activity that, again, our freshman class was doing. They were reading articles. This is from the World History Project, and they work with Newsella and have great articles. This was one on the fall of ancient empires, but really thinking about, like how empires fall, right? And so what my students were doing here was we cut up the paragraphs that they were reading, and then they had to sequence them, and they were looking for, their transitional words to help them, or their signal words to help them think about, the structure overall. So that was something that, we did as an activity that was really kind of nice, nice way to tap into that thinking. And I'm not gonna, in the interest of time, I'll just talk about that. That activity in the book is all about finding the gist, which is a really great way to help kids summarize. Another strategy to help kids is thinking about visual representation. So this is that same Empire's Fall article. And what was really cool about this activity is they were first thinking about cause and effect relationships in terms of, what are the reasons that empires fall? And it actually boils down to some fairly similar reasons. However, there are some nuances. So we first started talking about that using, a simple kind of cause and effect organizer. And then we broke into thinking about different empires. So the Han Dynasty, the Roman Empire, and then my student chose the Gupta Empire. And so we talked a lot about how these three empires were similar and how they were different. And we went through and tracked. And then you can go ahead, Nancy. We worked on a comparison contrast essay. So they were really thinking about similarly, they put together their brainstorming, they created a draft. And then as we were going through, we went through and looked for all of the signal words that they were using to really think about the overall cohesion of that draft. So this is one of the sections from that towards the end of the essay where they went through and they found all of the words that help them cue the reader into, to the compare and contrast thinking.
Yeah, again, that wonderful connection here, that integration of reading and writing, beautifully illustrated. Yeah.
And then finally, questioning. I think we've talked about this, before. And narrative, like with narrative, using questioning to deepen and broaden students' understanding of informational and expository text is really important. You have this table for you in the activity book, but really thinking about the different types of text structure and, thinking again, kind of intro level questions and then how we can have advanced questions. And you can adapt these questions to the text themselves and, teachers can think about them. You can incorporate them before, during, or after reading.
Yeah, there were some questions in the chat. One from Becky, and one from Beth.
Yeah. Oh, and I think Becky, I hope I answered your question. I think thinking about with CuraPod, it is all, yes, they go and they work right on the slide itself like a Jamboard, so 100%. And then an estimate of class time for reading, board work, and paper. Oh, that's a good question, Beth. I'm thinking, so they did a lot of the reading in class, and then, in terms of thinking about that, and then the board work was probably at least 45 minutes, and then the paper was class time. They worked on that. There was multiple days for the paper, and so we would go, sometimes I'll like get it to push in and I'll do work with my individual boys, and then other times they come and meet with me. So that I'm a little less clear on, but it was a multi day project, if that helps to answer the question. It definitely took place probably a 7-day rotation, maybe longer.
Yeah. But look at the deep thinking that occurred and the understanding of how these two, how the processes overlap.
That history teacher too, he's really phenomenal. The World History Project, the OER stuff, they get it. They have anticipation guide. So they do this thing called 3 close reads, and the kids go through and they assess their knowledge first, and then they have to read it again. They have a series of questions, and then they have a final series of questions. And the boys have even reported, my freshmen have said, that really helps me understand. And it's all of those resources, you just make an account and it's free, and there's videos, it's awesome. And this history teacher, he's great. Kevin is amazing, and he likes this kind of the science of reading. He loves it and he's into it. So we have a lot of good collaboration time, which is exciting.
I also think that there's ways to, certainly it's great to have examples for older students, because oftentimes we don't, but we also can then be thinking about the adaptations and how one goes about using this with younger students, which you've talked about earlier this evening as well. So, it's really about scaffolding and structuring and building then the knowledge in incremental bits so that they're able to handle this. All right, we're ready for your breakout room again. All right, so we're going with the same rooms. Check out what you're going to talk about. Use of exemplar text for narrative and informational, breakout room 1, 2, working with story elements and structure with narrative text, and so on. So take a moment now, be thinking about this, but I know that we also asked you to think about, you know, activities that you use. So you can throw that into the mix if you would like. All right.
Well, I would suggest maybe taking a photo of that.
Oh,
Um,
sure.
Oh, that's a great idea.
As they,
That
when
would
they
be
get into their
wonderful.
breakout rooms in
Yeah.
specific areas. Yeah.
Yep, that would be wonderful. So but just be thinking about equal airtime, be thinking about who your spokesperson is going to be, and you never know what rooms I might call on. So, and I think this time we have to give them at least 10 minutes, and that'll take us to 8:15. All right. All
All
right.
right, I will open the rooms.
Yeah.
There we go. Did everyone get a chance to kind of just take a quick photograph of that? So awesome. Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
And I will pause the recording. Remember to do that. Let's see. Yep.
Stop it.
This meeting is being recorded.
Okay. All right. So hoping you had some good conversations, and hopefully you remember who your spokesperson is. And I'm going to start with room number 3, visual representations for narrative text. What'd you all talk about?
That's me, Nina. We talked about a couple different things. We talked about the organizers that are within this text.
Yeah.
Tony was talking about the one on page 109 with the character, looking at the actions, the thoughts and feelings, the descriptions. And then the nice, simple 3 little boxes at the bottom about looking at the character's actual trait in the beginning, the middle, and the end. And we can, you know, using those to determine if a character is static or a dynamic character, those types of things, like just helping kids organize their thoughts in those situations. We also talked about graphic organizers and how they help different students at different points. Caroline is, I believe, grades 1 and 2, and she was talking about the need for her younger students to have that organizer. We talked about the need for explicit instruction on how to use the organizer and the purpose that the organizer is being used needs to be communicated. We talked also about, I had an example of a student in 7th grade where he was a great writer. His actual communication, not so good, but his written expression, phenomenal. And the graphic organizer that they were using actually stymied him. Because he didn't know what thought fit into what box. But if he was given the freedom to just go, he could go. So just making sure that you're watching those types of things and you're adapting and modifying those needs for students. I also talked about a visualization technique that I used in my classroom where we identified words. So we were looking at vocabulary and why the author used this specific word and literally what visualization was supposed to be happening based on that vocabulary and how that language interacted. So we had some pretty good discussions.
That's great. Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you. All right, let's go to room 5, use of teacher and student questions for narrative. Yeah. Who's in room 5?
I feel like I'm already telling off. Okay, go ahead.
It's just 2 of us, and I'm happy to let the other person go because I tend to talk, but I'm happy to go too.
Okay, all right.
Well, we actually veered off a little bit, and what I'm remembering at the end, I'm sorry, it's the end of the night here. I'm starting to get a little
That's okay.
Is just we were talking about 2 things were shared. One was actually going to live performances really helps bring in and make the questions you know, deeper. And then my partner shared that she likes having people write the questions, her students write the questions out to get a deeper understanding. And we talked a little bit about predictions and kind of what I don't remember where I heard this, but that something about good readers don't really do a whole bunch of predictions. And do you have any guidance on that?
I don't recall reading that specifically, but I do know that yeah, we've had a heavy emphasis on prediction, and that in terms of inference, predictions are not are as powerful as looking at cause. All right, I do know that. Yeah.
And again, I'm like half speaking here, so sorry, like both my memory and the night, but thank you for addressing that. And then the other thing that came up, I'm gonna forget it. I really sound terrible. I'm sorry.
It's understandable. Okay. All right.
I turned into a pumpkin at 8 o'clock, I guess.
It's all right. Cinderella influence.
I just dropped in the chat too, folks. If people are interested, there is an excellent training through Harvard. It's called the question formulation technique, and it really teaches kids to ask their own questions. And so I feel like there's been so much about like critical thinking and pushing kids to be able to develop their own questions. And it's a really, really simple protocol and how they teach it. I think it's wonderful. So I took that last year. It's something that I've utilized a lot. But thinking about getting kids to ask their own questions, I highly recommend checking it out.
Yeah, that's just as important. The literature has told us as the answering of questions. It's the generating or the asking, the student asking. Okay, room 7, visual representations for informational text. Would you all talk about in room 7? And where is room 7? Calling room 7.
I'll talk.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks.
We talked about visuals being important we have 2 ESL teachers that were in our group, so we talked about that. I also work with kiddos who have autism, so any kind of visual being important. We talked about the fishbone, which I had never seen before, so that was kind of neat seeing that laid out.
Yeah.
We kind of talked about visuals being used for just about anything, for grammar and other things. We kind of went off topic right there for a little bit. Let's see. Oh, and I brought up just a point that as a child, I remember understanding informational text easier than narrative. And I wondered if others remembered it that way, or if it's just the way my brain tends to organize material.
I don't know. Generally, what the literature tells us is that children come to school, with the knowledge of narrative text. And so that generally is easier. So it just may be that you're a super duper organizer.
I have to have things organized. That may be it.
All right. Good. All right. How about I kind of deviate here a little bit because I didn't call on you before. How about room number 8, working with signal words and text features for informational text? How about a little bit on signal words now? And that is room number 8. Now, I know you all thinking, oh, she's going odd numbers, so I'm not ready for this. Okay, where's room number 8? Who can speak to this? What'd you all talk about? And bird walking is allowed a little bit if you talked about something else. All right, waiting on room number 8. We're getting close to the end here too. Yeah.
Hi, I was in room number 8.
Okay, cool.
And we talked a lot about identifying the text features with a nonfiction text and having the students use headings, maps, graphs, all that information. And with one of my groups, if we notice text features in the book, we put up a little check mark on a sticky note on the bulletin board to identify what we noticed in there. And how the author's using it. And then also we identify the genre of the text and see how that fits in. And then we do use signal. We did talk a little bit about signal words. That wasn't one that we spent a lot of time with, but we do point out the signal words going through a passage.
Okay, all right. You know, it's interesting because the years that I spent in classroom and in school, I hardly ever saw anyone talk about the text features per se. Other than maybe, you know, the chapter heading and using that, you know, as a way of asking a question, but not digging deeply into this. And I think, you know, understanding text features for informational text is particularly important. So, all right, I think all of you got to share except room number 1. I'll make sure I come back to room number 1 next time, but I'm looking at the time. And so I have to kind of quickly go back to share the screen. Room number 1, if you had something you really wanted to share quickly now in the chat box, you could do that as well. We don't want to overlook anyone. So we'll
I
watch.
also, Nancy, I also just dropped the link for CuraPod in the chat in case people want to check that out.
Yeah, good. Okay. So I think Julia will come back to this. You can talk to people about this next time round. All right. And we did ask you to kind of connect with the instructional focus narrative and information text and consider any other evidence-based activities. We'll be asking you for some of your ideas next time round because we didn't quite get to this. So expect that we'll either do a breakout room or a kind of an open share on that next time round. All right. Also, we'll want you thinking about the curriculum review tool and thinking about the text structure part of knowledge here. So is there explicit instruction to teach students to use specialized text structures, genre, does the curriculum feature opportunities, and so on. So that'll be in the structured guide as part of the assignment for next time around. Don't forget, each time we give you a viewing link, and this would be from the 20th celebration of Scarborough's Reading Rope Literacy Knowledge, Dr. Deborah Reed, thanks to Pam Kastner and her wonderful crew. And so this is a really, really good workshop. So I would encourage you to take a look at this when you have time. And if you have others, please share those out. All right.
I will put that on the PAPA too as well.
Yep, that will be great. So next session, implementing the blueprint knowledge. And that I believe is April 18th. All right, so gratitude from Julia and I for your being with us this evening, because I know for many of you, it is spring break or it's approaching, and it's probably, if you are in school, it's probably been a really busy kind of hectic week. All right, so Pam, you want to close it out for us?